SportsLit is co-founded and co-hosted by Neil Acharya and Nate Sager. Technical producer and engineer, Michael Ella. Executive producer, Neil Acharya.
Welcome, one and all. Our guest is Michael Cochrane, discussing his book, Olympic Lion, The Untold Story of the First Gold Medal for Golf, released by Cartpath Press in 2016, republished in 2023 ahead of the upcoming Olympics and Paralympics. And of course, I am Nathan Sager. The legend of George S. Lyon seems like that tee shot that just soared majestically in the sky, and then it took a hook and landed in parts unknown. Who was the Olympic Lion? Well, until 2012, his triumph and legacy were unknown to lawyer and author Michael Cochrane. Even as a dedicated golfer and golf fan who's made holes in one and played famous courses such as St. Andrews and Muirfield, to the sites in rotation for the British Open that takes place every July, Cochrane did not know about this Canadian sports legend. But it was just one day, as he tells it in Olympic Lion, he spotted a replica medal at the Rosedale Golf Club in Toronto, and he's set to becoming the authorly advocate to reintroduce George S. Lyon to readers in this century. Lyon being someone who helped popularize golf in turn of the 20th century Southern Ontario, and indeed the first golfer to bring home an Olympic gold medal, and as it would turn out, the last for more than a century. Lyon was, in one of the phrases of recent guest Ken Dryden, an all-rounder. As an athlete, he played a variety of sports, and he had an insurance business in Toronto. He took up golf in his late 30s, and he ended up being an 8-time Canadian men's amateur champion. He had a nice rivalry with his brother-in-law, Fritz Martin, who was also a multiple times Canadian men's amateur champion. George is described as a personal fellow. He loved to lead the odd, no doubt, libation-amplified sing-along to My Wild Irish Rose, a hit song of the day. And I think maybe pour one out retroactively for Annette Lyon, George's wife, because she's caught in the middle of this golf rivalry between her brother and her husband. The details about what George S. Lyon overcame on his quest to win gold at the 1904 Summer Olympics in St. Louis, Missouri, all of what I know of that come from Michael Cochrane, so I'll leave it to him to tell. But again, it sort of slipped through the cracks because there were no Olympic gold medals in golf again until Rio 2016. Inbee Park and Justin Rose. My Wild Irish Rose? Justin Rose? You cannot make that up. So as Cochrane tells it, he was stunned. He'd never heard about this. I mean, Cochrane is a heavy hitter in the legal world. He's a partner at the Brauti Thorning LLP firm in Toronto, where his practice includes family law and wills and estates. He also hosts a program called Strictly Legal on the Business News Network in Canada, and he's penned 2 other novels. And having found this artifact of George S. Lyon hiding in plain sight, Cochrane set about spending, as he puts it, weekends and days off from my law practice, writing a work of historical fiction that would capture the man and his times and where he stood in relation to historical events during the early decades of the Canadian experiment. As a reader, I felt I was right there, following Lyon around the golf course 120 years ago. And I am not a golfer. Cochrane just has this keen sense of placement with filling readers in about, what it was like to play a round of golf back then, what they wore, what the equipment was like. He also reminds some people of the imperfect progress of the Canadian experiment. And he also talks about how golf made its way from Scotland and sort of spread its roots, spread its wings in Canada and the United States. By the way, I Googled, what's the oldest golf course in North America. There's several that make that claim, but I will point out, I think it's the Royal Montreal Golf Club, and Well, maybe it's fitting where I was looking it up this week, a club that has royal in its name, since a country that calls itself a constitutional presidential republic and went 248 years without a monarchy has decided the president is now a king. Sorry, I just couldn't let that go by. Sorry. But there are sports stars from Lions Day who are talked about in popular Canadian history. Think Frank McGee in hockey, or Tom Longboat, the Onondaga distance running champion. Of course, the Stanley Cup and the Boston Marathon, that's been competed for continuously for 120, 130 years. Well, Lyon was long off the tee. Golf and the Olympics turned out to be not together for very long. And again, anyway, though, despite that, there's this great, Canadian and international sports story that people might not have known about. It's kind of in the same regard as our premiere of season 3 in 2019 when Mark Hebscher discussed his book, The Greatest Athlete You've Never Heard Of, about the first Canadian to win an Olympic event. I'm not sharing the name here. You will have to go to sportslit.ca to find that episode and find our whole catalog and find links to buy all of the books Neil Acharya and I have read for this podcast since 2017. Of course, you can also find it on all of your podcast platforms. Remember to rate and review. It helps us show up in other people's searches. Michael Cochrane first published Olympic Lion in 2016 before the Rio Games. He's updated it for the past 2 Summer Olympics, Paralympic cycles. And we thought, hey, we've never had a golf book on here. Let's do this ahead of Paris 2024 before the golf tournament, where it's going to be, I think, Corey Connors and Nick Taylor representing Canada in the men's tournament, August 1st to 4th, and then Brooke Henderson and Alina Sharp in the women's event from August 7th to 10th. Feel a bit of a connection there because Brooke Henderson's from the Ottawa area. By the way, over there, we don't say our hometown is Smiths Falls. We say Smiths Falls. And Alina Sharp's from Hamilton, where I live. But anyways, Michael has done the search and he came up with that ball that disappeared over the horizon, metaphorically speaking. Hey, maybe it's even the one the Dalai Lama, big hitter, the Lama, whacked through the base of a 10,000-foot crevice when Carl Spackler was caddying for him. Yeah, I have to make a Caddyshack reference. It's a way of compensating. Can I get a mulligan? So we're roughly at the turn in our SportsLit year. It's a good time to mention some partings that I find or feel are pertinent to a podcast for sports fans who read. And of course, in sports and entertainment, I have reading recommendations that pertain to 4 notable people who've left us. Jerry West, the logo in NBA lore. He was heroic for sharing his depression story in the best-selling biography, West by West, My Charmed, Tormented Life. It was written in 2011 with Jonathan Coleman. And we've had some Willie Mays talk when Jerry Grillo was here for Big Cat. Well, the definitive Mays bio, proud to have on my bookshelf, is Willie Mays, The Life, the Legend, published in 2010 by James S. Hirsch. And the other 2 from the entertainment world, Canada's greatest actor, Donald Sutherland, and comic actor Martin Mull died 7 days apart. And they both have a tie to a comedy great. I love reading about listening to how the funny is found in comedy. If you can ever find a copy of it, pick up A Futile and Stupid Gesture, How Doug Kenny and National Lampoon Changed Comedy by Josh Karp. And Karp has also written a book about golf, so it's pertinent here and relevant here. And Doug Kenny, of course, also a prominent figure in Christian Nashawade's book, Caddyshack, The Making of a Hollywood Cinderella Story, since Kenny was one of the writers and the producer. As it happens, if you think of Donald Sutherland, a great Canadian actor, Montreal Expos fan. The thing I always love, little factoid I always love, is his big scene in Animal House. I think everyone knows how he turned down a percentage of the gross and cost himself millions, but he has that big scene where he's, giving the English lecture to a room full of, bored students, and he finally just goes, "Okay, don't write this down, but I find Milton probably about as boring as you find Milton. This is Milton, found him boring too." And for me, that's just always taken on layers, knowing that he's basically just found a way to channel like every probably frustrated academic who's teaching a first-year literature class to a room full of kids who don't quite get it. And and of course, that was all not in the original script. It was something Doug Kenny crafted, and Donald Sutherland found a way to inflect it just so. Martin Mull, he was probably in your favorite show as a guest star, recurring role at some point. If you were a 90s kid, he he was in at least 2 shows you watched. And of course, about 6 months ago, the YouTube algorithm started bringing up old episodes of Fernwood Tonight, which was the satirical, way ahead of its time talk show that he hosted with Fred Willard in character. They played characters, but it lasted about 1 year. It's something hilarious and groundbreaking. You feel like the people who worked with David Letterman and later with Conan O'Brien and other late night hosts just sat there and took very copious notes. I guess, I don't know if the two of them ever worked together, or if they even knew each other, but I think whatever they did, they brought who they were and not what maybe people expected. And when you do that, in anything you do, I think it becomes timeless and it sticks with people. It might not be the most popular thing, but it will endure. Anyways, the reason I brought them both up is they both had that tie to Doug Kenny. Sutherland acted out a scene that Kenny made funny, and in 2018, when they brought out the David Wayne directed biopic based on Josh Karp's book came out, also called A Futile and Stupid Gesture, they had Martin Mull play the older version of Doug Kenny if he had lived and enjoyed his, 70+ years and been around long enough to try to shoot his age in golf. So yeah, that's basically sums it up. I don't know how all those dots connect, but it raises my consciousness to do so. So I got that going for me, which is nice. And it's also nice to have Michael Cochrane here to talk about Olympic Lion, which he will do momentarily. Welcome to SportsLit, Michael Cochrane.
Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, I hope we're not keeping you off the golf course today, because it looks like it wouldn't be a bad day to get out on the links here in sort of the Hamilton, Burlington region.
It is a gorgeous day, and I have plans to play 18 later.
Nice. This time of year, long days. I wanted to get a little philosophical because I read Olympic Lion and really enjoyed it. In the afterward, you sort of state your case about golf needing to always remember its worth, as you put it, the practice, the silence, and the opportunity for personal introspection. What sort of inspired you to sort of write that about this game you love so much?
Well, I came to golf late in life, a lot like George Lyon. He was 38 when he was first introduced, and he was quite an athlete before he took up golf in 1895. But I think over the time that I learned golf, and went through the usual trials and tribulations about equipment and do I take lessons? Do I try to teach myself? Understanding course management, all those things. One of the things I did notice playing with a lot of different people is that it really does come down to, managing yourself on a golf course and managing yourself ideally in the silence of nature, experiencing these courses. I encountered people, with their boombox on the golf course, on the golf cart. People who had talked too much, people who don't talk at all, people who aren't sociable, people who are angry at themselves, angry at the course, angry at the world. And I started to think, that really the best times on a golf course are the times where you're enjoying your company, enjoying the course, and enjoying the nature experience, and in large part enjoying the silence and also, one's own thoughts as you go around, because you really do have to maintain a sense of humor about things and patience. I think those are all the things that I came to love about golf, and I just hope we can preserve it, because certainly, I think golf right now, as we talk in 2024, leading up to the Olympics, that I think the game is going through a very rough time. And whether it's the part about the Live Tour, or it's rolling back golf balls, or lengthening courses, or strange developments in golf clubs. I think these are tough times, and we need to not forget where it all started and why we enjoyed it in the first place.
Yeah, I just liked what you said about the just the value of just being mindful of yourself, and that was one reason I never got the hang of it. I just get too tough on myself over tiny mistakes. Now, you describe in the book how you came to know of George Lyon, but what were some of the automatic thoughts when you found out about his crowning achievement and the fact that it was something that had sort of just been lost through the I guess the sand trap of time, as it were?
Well, good, well put. I think my first thoughts were typical Canadians. We don't know how to celebrate some of the great lives. We've even drifted into times where we denigrate some of the great Canadians, like Sir John A. Macdonald, but that's another discussion. So George Lyon, I encountered, and I thought, how on earth has no one ever told this man's story? Not only is he the first person to win a gold medal for Olympic golf, that just scratches the surface of the amazing life that this man had. So I would say my first reaction was, typical Canadians, we're hiding our light under a bushel, as they say. But also, I thought I'm going to roll up my sleeves and I'm going to find out more. And that was back in 2012 that I started part-time to do some research on this. And it took 3 or 4 years really to get to the bottom of it all. But at the end of it, I just thought, wow, this man's story has to be told.
Yeah, just the fact that he was kind of right there at a pinch point for the sport taking off in this part of Canada, and really, I guess, Canada and the United States, eh?
Yeah, in North America, I think around 1895, which is, as I say, the year that he came to golf, and coincidentally, roughly the same period that Walter Travis, who was really his kind of U.S. equivalent, older athletic gentleman, discovered golf. But around 1895, we see less than a dozen golf courses in the United States, and within a decade, there were thousands. This was, as you say, the pinch point when golf really exploded in North America. And interesting, I think, was that not only was golf itself coming to North America, and not only were courses being built, there were golfers emigrating over from Scotland and England to be able to teach all these golfers who are coming to the sport brand new. And here we have all of the equipment questions at the very beginning. What kind of golf balls are people going to play with? What kind of development is there going to be in the golf ball? What about clubs? They're playing with hickory shafts and unusual wooden heads. The irons are all crafted basically in Scotland, and very few clubs being made in North America. And and people thinking about golf course design. So a lot of the questions that we even face today in golf, they were confronting them at the very beginning as it exploded in North America.
Yeah. Now, as George S. Lyon, how would you sort of best describe him as a sports person in, I guess, contemporary terms?
Oh my gosh, would he be like Lee Trevino? Would he a little bit, because Lee Trevino, I think, is kind of one of the golfers that we think of as being the most gregarious and probably the most professional, fun professional on a golf course. But Shane is the kind of guy you'd love to play a round of golf with, and you'd love to go for a beer with him after that round of golf. He was 100% personality. He was a student of game. People loved him. The expression that people used to describe him was that wherever George Lyon, that was the head of the table. he was the focal point of socializing around golf, and a man who was very, very fun to play with. So that was the kind of, who would you say is like that today on a golf course? I don't know. You see some of these sourpusses, Cantley, for example. They look like they're working in a salt mine when they're going around a golf course, not enjoying themselves. George Lyon wasn't like that at all. He would sing and he'd hum and he'd cough, and he was fun to play with.
Yeah. And now what would a round of golf at a course in Toronto have looked like in his sort of peak years, like right around the turn of the 20th century?
Yeah, so you look back at, as I say, that pinch point of 1895, and Rosedale, a golf course, is basically a cow pasture that runs alongside some railway tracks and a cricket field. The cricket field was the main sporting center that got attention. But they squeezed this 18 holes in beside the cricket fields, beside the train tracks, and all the fairways crisscrossed, and it was a real mishmash. A local farmer, dairy cows were out on the course while guys were playing. It wasn't taken seriously. There was also the Toronto Golf Club at that time, and golf courses were springing up around Canada, in particular Ontario. There's a course in Brantford. There's obviously Royal Montreal, and other ones. But in Toronto, it was pretty limited. They started to pop up, but when you think of what Rosedale Golf and Country Club is like today, magnificent new clubhouse, beautiful course, compared to what it was in 1895, it's night and day.
Yeah, and just to give I'll just briefly digress to give listeners a reminder. 1904. I mean, I think three of the four major men's pro sports leagues didn't even exist yet. And I looked, the deciding game of the Stanley Cup that year was on January 4th, not June 24th, like the recent Stanley Cup final. The World Series wasn't played because one team owner didn't think they should have to play the league owner of the other league. The last time no World Series was played until, as we all know, in Canada, 1994. I sort of was really interested in about your decision to sort of marshal the kind of the historically correct facts to write historical fiction. What sort of gave you the idea that that was the way forward to tell the story properly?
Yeah, well, that's just on the professional sports league side of things for a moment. Back then, Stanley Cup was best of three games, and teams. We don't see Toronto Maple Leafs. We see teams in Halifax and competing, but professionalism was really looked down on. Professionalism in sports, I should say, was looked down upon. And if for your listeners, if they ever want to read a good book about the origins of hockey in Canada, former Prime Minister Stephen Harper wrote a fantastic book about hockey that I relied on in part to tell a story about something that had happened in Toronto with this young fellow named Carmichael, who had accepted a fee to play in a hockey game. And because of that, he was shunned. He wasn't allowed to play in other leagues, and he lost a job offer. And his colleagues and friends shunned him because he accepted a fee to play in a hockey game. So it was a different time for sports and for sports leagues. But to answer your question about why be historically accurate, I think it might be sort of the lawyer in me checking my footnotes and citations of cases and things. I wanted to make sure that if somebody who knew everything about history of that period, and someone who knew everything about golf, and knew everything about equipment, and knew the calendar, right down to whether it was the full moon or not, I wanted that person to read this book and say, "Yep, that's the golf ball that they played. Yep,
Mhm.
that's the drive that Ryan had on the 14th hole." And I wanted to make sure that readers were getting a precise description of everything. And I can attest to the fact that every historical reference is 100% accurate. And I'll give you an example. In one of the chapters, I talk about experiences that George Lyon's grandfather had in the War of 1812, and the
Yeah.
kind of weapons that were being used, and the way that a cannon would fire a certain kind of shell, and how many pellets that shell would release in a battle in 1814. That's all 100% historically accurate, because whether it was golf or the military history or the experiences George Lyon had in the Yale Rebellion, it had to be 100% accurate for me to be satisfied with it. So that was my approach to the research.
Yeah, but throughout all, there really seemed to be a strong just sense of story, and at times I've had to remind myself, okay, this is kind of reconstruction of as you're following George around the course and our Glen Echo Country Club in St. Louis, and I was just like, I had to remind myself, this is as presented, it's essentially finding the truth through sort of the the precise reconstruction of it.
Yeah, I was lucky to have some pretty detailed newspaper accounts, because back then, people got 2 newspapers a day. They'd get a morning newspaper, they'd get an afternoon newspaper, and there was very detailed reporting on every round of golf. And
Okay.
all of those newspapers were available to describe, like I'll give you an example. There's one drive that Lyon hit on a hole at Glen Echo, and it's described as being, he had a cuppy lie, meaning it was sitting in the divot. That's what he was referred to as, a cuppy lie. That's what happened on that hole. That's how far he drove the ball, and that's the lie that he had. I was able to extract that from newspaper accounts. And
Wow.
one of the things that I did that was very, very fortunate for my research was I was able to spend a week in Chicago in their public library. And they have a very extensive collection of golf books and very detailed records about equipment and history of the golf ball, things like that. So I was able to benefit a lot from that research.
Nice. And I guess that really, as Neil and I, when we first did this, we used to record in the Toronto Public Library. So it's always nice to hear a little bit of advocacy for the value of the social good of a library.
Oh man, I'm a huge advocate for libraries. Toronto's world class for its library system, and here I live in Burlington now, and excellent library system here as well, and excellent archives that they maintain as a part of their library.
Yeah. Now I did want to ask. What I was struck by with how the narrative moved, you got a sense of what all the real life people you're depicting, what they would have wanted out of something. I guess it's just, how would you just, as as a lawyer who's written a book, compare and contrast sort of the amount of writing you do in the legal profession with writing this book?
Yeah, law. I think people think of law as being pretty black and white. Cases are decided, decisions are made, records are kept, convictions registered. People win, people lose. But really, one of the great things, I've been in law for 44 years, practicing for 44 years, and one of the things that I've always felt about law is that these cases that we read and the decisions that are made, they're great narratives. In many ways, judges are historians. they are taking a set of facts that occurred years before it's in front of them, especially these days. The delays in the justice system these days are just crazy. Judges are looking at things that happened 10 years ago. But bottom line is that judges have always been historians. And in their decisions, they're telling stories about what happened to people. And there's a narrative there. And, I think maybe part of me carries that narrative, tried to carry that narrative style into telling George Lyon's story and making sure it's accurate, historically accurate. So there's a bit of storytelling there, I guess, storytelling in law, storytelling in golf history.
And it's also sort of a balance of having, I guess, as you say, over 44 years of having to know the applicable laws, but also I think knowing how to read people emotionally too, I would imagine.
Yeah, it's true. You certainly do almost become an amateur psychologist doing law. Big part of my practice over the years has been doing very high conflict divorces, high conflict disputes over estates, conflict and disputes over people who win lotteries. And you really do see it all. You see every kind of personality, good and bad.
I bet. Now, I'm sort of dog-legged away from. I promise I'll can it with the golf similes soon. But what did it? So George, yeah. What? No, thank you. What did it sort of take for him to get himself to St. Louis in 1904 to play in the Olympics, and B, to play on through what was not exactly good golf weather?
Oh my gosh, it was terrible in Missouri. They really, remember they're playing in September, and this is, as I try to make sure people appreciate in the book, is that the Olympics are being held at the same time as the World's Fair in St. Louis. The movie Meet Me in St. Louis. This is the World's Fair that they're talking about, and it is a very special time in America because of this World's Fair that they have for the first time. Certainly, there have been exhibitions and big events, but nothing like the World's Fair of St. Louis. And here the Olympics are being run parallel to it. So this is a real special time in America, and just the trophies, the medals, and everything are part indication of it. But what got George Lyon down to St. Louis and to this golf course, Glen Echo, is kind of an interesting other Canadian story. Is that one of his best friends was a fellow named Albert Austin, very wealthy Torontonian. His family had made their money in banking and in gas and energy, early days of energy banking. Very wealthy. And Albert Austin was an avid golfer. And his father had built, he was the founder of Dominion Bank in Canada. His father had built a big, beautiful mansion up at the top of Spadina, or Spadina, as some people pronounce it, Spadina House. Big, beautiful mansion. And he had his own golf course behind it, which he ultimately had to give up because of urban expansion in Toronto. But Albert Austin loved golf, and he asked early on, after George Lyon had become Canadian amateur champion 3 times, he asked him to join him in a venture to start Lambton Golf Course in just west of Toronto. So that club gets built and they're friends, and it's while that under is being fulfilled, that Albert Austin sees in the newspaper that St. Louis has not just the World's Fair, but they have the Olympics as well. And it's really Albert Austin who gets George Lyon down to St. Louis and Glen Echo Golf Course. And, George Lyon is not a wealthy man. He's a fire insurance salesman.
Mm-hmm.
And he just happens to, become a fantastic golfer. He lived in Rosedale, but at that time, Rosedale was not what people think of Rosedale today, being sort of a white, wealthy enclave in Toronto. Back then, it was quite a middle-class neighborhood of modest homes, one of which Lyon and his wife and kids lived in. So the idea that George Lyon could afford to pick up and take a week off in September to go down to St. Louis and compete in the Olympics, that wouldn't have happened if it had not been for Albert Austin to support him. Private railway car. They take the railway down. They're put up at the Glen Echo Golf Club, and really, it's Austin who makes it happen.
Yeah, and you sort of set it up that George is on this long train trek, and goodness knows how many hours it was in those days. He's got this anticipation it's going to be this big international thing, and as people know, I think they're even modestly acquainted with that Olympics. The reality of it did not meet those expectations. But as you tell the story, Michael, he just sort of gives him more intention. I guess, what did you draw on to show those emotions that he very well would quite likely had at that time?
I think it's a combination of two things. At that point, here he arrives in St. Louis, on this golf course, Glen Echo, that's just outside of St. Louis. And he learns that this so-called international competition has fallen prey to the politics around Olympic golf at that time. And he discovers that no golfers have come from Europe. None of the famous English golfers, Hilton, Braid, Hutchinson, any of those guys had shown up. And extreme disappointment he had to feel that he wasn't going to meet the best of the best. And then he finds out that Walter Travis, who's essentially his doppelganger in the U.S., a fellow who had at one point leading up was the 1903 U.S. amateur champion and the 1903 British amateur champion at the same time. He had published books, and he was a golf course architect. And I just thought, George Lyon and Walter Travis have to meet at the Olympics. And I'm sure that George Lyon thought of it that way. And he shows up, and what does he find out? Not only aren't the British and Scots coming over, but Walter Travis isn't going to play either. He's bailed on it for some reason. He gives an excuse that he has business commitments. Other people say that, it's Travis bowed out because he didn't want to take a licking from some of these younger golfers that were coming up. And I think this is the other tension, too, for George Lyon. George Lyon's 46 years old when he's at the Olympics. And he's going to be meeting golfers who are much younger than him. Even Walter Travis was a couple of years younger than George Lyon. And here, this older gentleman gets to St. Louis for the Olympics, finds out that all the people he wanted to play against aren't going to be there. Instead, he's going to meet a group of young strangers. And I think that had to really whet his appetite for the competition.
Yeah, great story. And the other thing, too, about this competition now, when they do the, almost all, major golf tournaments, and the Olympics are no different, are, 72 holes of stroke play. But this was, I think, you actually have like the actual figure of how many holes of golf that George S. Lyon would have had to play in those Olympics, because it was 36 holes of match play a day for basically, about 5 days in a row before he beats Chandler Egan for the gold.
Yeah. On Monday they have the qualifying. qualifying round, 36 holes, 18 in the morning, 18 in the afternoon. That was a stroke play, low rounds qualifying. Tuesday, they start their match play. So it's no longer stroke play, it's match play now. Tuesday, 18 in the morning, 18 in the afternoon. Wednesday, same thing. Thursday, same thing. Friday, same thing. And then Saturday, 36-hole championship match. And as we said, earlier, terrible weather the whole week. It was a slog for them. But extraordinary amount of golf compared to what they're doing at the Olympics now. They're playing basically, 72 holes of stroke play.
Yeah, 36 times 6 is 216, but of course you can win like 3 and 2 or whatever. So we're probably talking over 200 holes of golf in 6 days in heavy wool.
There were a couple of times, like on the Tuesday. On the Wednesday, Lyon meets this fellow Stickney, who's a local favorite. Plays at a local St. Louis golf club. And Lyon dispatched him 11 and 9. So he wouldn't have played a full 36 that day. But from what I could tell in some of the newspaper accounts, is even if they finished their match, they still went on and played. They played their way back into the clubhouse. So they played a lot of golf.
Well, you still need to know the course, right? And I don't think, and golf carts are, a few generations away now. Walter Travis, glad that you mentioned him, Michael, because something that I looked up. One of his principles was with designing a course was he said holes should be laid out so as to provide for the playing of every conceivable sort of stroke. How is that sort of just an argument? A case of showing that it's whatever the game is, golf, a team sport, that it's important that people play it in there's different ways to play.
I spent a lot of time studying golf course architecture as a part of my research, and I think golfers appreciate courses that offer risk reward, a challenge. You can play the golf course this way, or you can play this a different way over here. But there's a risk and there's a reward, and that to me is the measure of a good course. Certainly you want a course to be beautiful. You certainly want a course to have signature holes. Nobody likes a gimmicky golf course. But Walter Travis was invited by the president of the Glen Echo, a fellow named Colonel McGrew. He had been invited to come out and take a look at the course, the Glen Echo, and see if it was suitable for Olympic competition. And Walter Travis came out there. And I should say, Walter Travis's reputation is he was a bit prickly.
Yeah.
He liked a thermos full of Old Turkey whiskey, and he liked to smoke long, thin black cigars. And he wore a Rough Rider style hat. And most of the accounts that I've read is that he was a prickly fellow. Anyways, Travis ends up in Glen Echo looking at the course, and Colonel McGrew asks him, what do you think? And Travis said, you got to redo the whole course. He said, I can't believe it. It's just 2 years ago they just built this course, and it's they had James Foulis, famous Scottish golf architect, help them build it, and he couldn't believe it. But Travis said, no, you have to make this hole longer. You have to move the tee here. You have to have more challenge over there. He introduced a whole new level of challenge to the course with his recommendations. And to the credit, Glen Echo, under the guidance of Colonel McGrew, implemented every single one of his recommendations, which I take the readers through in detail, because I wanted a lover of golf courses and a lover of golf to appreciate what Travis did to Glen Echo to make it an Olympic giant.
Yeah, and it's those little nuances and differences. It just struck me because watching I watch mostly pro sports, and it seems like everyone just plays the same system now, and it's just not, that just kind of leaves you a bit cold after a while when you can basically just predict the strategy ahead of time, I guess. And I sort of also wondered, I think you mentioned this in the book, what sort of led to you sort of going against the grain and saying, match play is something we should have more of in golf?
Yeah, I'm a big lover of match play. To me, that's my preferred way of playing. Yeah, I'm not against going out on Sundays and playing friendly 18 holes, but if somebody wants to have some real fun, we play match play. And I think that's because it's not just you against yourself and a course, it's you against an opponent. And there's strategic decisions that have to be made during a round of match play. Because you're not, as I said out in the book, you're not just trying to get the lowest score on a hole vis-a-vis par. You're trying to get the lowest score vis-a-vis your competitor. And as I say in the book, 4 beats a 5, 5 beats a 6, 8 beats a 9. So you're never out of it in match play. Crazy things can happen. So I think it's something we don't see enough of.
Yeah, and it sort of brings in like the head game of tennis a little, I think, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's not suited to television. That's probably the reason why in North America, because they need to know that they're going to wrap up 18 holes at 6 p.m. so that everybody gets their dinner and gets to see 60 minutes.
Yeah, in fact, I checked that. I checked in on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was actually the PGA Championship was match play basically up until the television era. So 1957, the TV was like, no, you got to switch and be like everyone else. But that's something I wanted to sort of ask a bit of a conceptual question. Now that we're streaming is probably the future, I wonder how long it's going to be till someone tries to have a golf. Who knows whether it would be the PGA or some other disruptor, but how feasible would it be to have match play in a major if people are watching it on Netflix? Just thought I'd throw that out there.
Yeah, I mean, I hope someone runs with it, because it's a more interesting way to play, I think, and also I think you're right with streaming. It's probably more feasible, but at the same time, the money at this point in time is network money, and or for Saudi Arabian money, I guess. But
yeah.
I don't know. I think we're looking at stroke play for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, I think that person also had the idea. Well, we'll only maybe get the top 16 move on to match play, and everyone else can sort of play for their purse and their 17th place and onwards. Now, I just thought, as we sort of want talk about the book, what was the sort of the politics that put the separated golf from the Olympic movement and just caused it to disappear for 112 years until it came back in 2016.
Yeah, well, there's a fellow named de Coubertin. He was the Frenchman who really pushed to get the Olympics underway again. He's the fellow who said, let's get the Olympics back to Greece. 1896. We'll start having the Olympics as they were meant to be in Greece. And he was successful. It was fantastic. 40,000 people showed up to watch those events. And then when it shifted to Paris in 1900, it was a whole different experience. He was asked to pair the Olympic experience with the exposition that was going on in Paris at the same time, and it was a disaster. It just did not work. None of the events were publicized as being Olympic events, including the golf. People who played golf in 1900 in Paris didn't know they were competing in an Olympic event. It was afterwards that they were told that, oh, by the way, you won the gold medal for golf. So it was not a good fit. And so that was in 1900. And then there's the politics around are the Olympics going to move to North America or are they going to stay in Europe? And de Coubertin was not in favor of a move to North America. He didn't think that America was ready and ready for it. But there was quite a bit of politics around that. There was a fellow named Sullivan, an Irishman in North America, Chicago fellow. He actually attempted a coup with the International Olympic Committee to get rid of de Coubertin and for him, Sullivan, to take over the International Olympic Committee. And that failed, but it created a lot of bad blood around Olympic competition coming to North America. But there was politics behind it that ended up with the governor of Missouri dispatching a friend, business associate, son-in-law, he was the son-in-law of a businessman in Missouri, to France to try and grease the wheels to get the Olympics moved over to St. Louis. The governor of Missouri gets the Congress to agree to delay the World's Fair a year so they can line the two things up. And this causes de Coubertin to think that, oh my God, we're going to have the same experience in St. Louis that we had in Paris if they try to put these two things together. So the thinking is that de Coubertin then sabotaged things behind the scenes. He talked down what was going to happen in St. Louis for the World's Fair and for the Olympics. And in part that explains why the English golfers and Scottish golfers and Europeans or others showed up. Notwithstanding the fact that dozens of countries, I think 40 countries were represented at the Olympics, but they didn't show up for the golf. And it really undermined it. And there was even politics in America between Chicago and St. Louis fighting over who was going to get the World's Fair, and a lot of bad blood around it. But I guess it's kind of like politics now.
Yeah. And all that politicking, golf just kind of, as you say, it went by the wayside as an Olympic sport, even though it's like there's always a golf course you can find, and
because in 1904 they do have the competition in St. Louis. It is good. There is a winner, George Lyon, and then 1908 should be off to London. But then there's this infighting that occurs between the various professional bodies, Royal and Ancient in St. Andrews, Scotland, and Americans and British fighting about what kind of rules are going to be. And the Olympic Committee says, look, if you guys can't figure it out, we're not going to have golf. So golf stops. It doesn't happen in 1908, even though Lyon was offered the gold medal. He showed up ready to play, and they said, no, we're canceling it, but you can have the gold medal because you showed up, and he turned it down. He said, no, I don't want a medal on that basis. And then they never got it sorted out. It wasn't until 2016 that golf returned to the Olympics in Rio, and 112 years it was suspended. Yeah.
And while we can all sort of have different attitudes towards the Olympics and how big they've got, and I guess just what's the the spiritual significance to people who golf that the sport is part of the games again.
Well, that's a really interesting question, because I have to admit I don't think spiritually about Olympic competition, because my personal view of it is that it has been contaminated significantly, whether it's the drug scandals or the politicking and stuff. So I just think that it's great that this sport, which is loved by millions and millions of people worldwide, that they get a chance to see the best competing in something other than a moneyed tournament. You know, and money has contaminated golf now with this competition between LIV and PGA in North America. And fans are turned off. Everybody I talk to, they're not interested in this war of words that's going on, the way that it's drawn players into having to express opinions about whether they like the guys who have gone to LIV, or whether the guys who've gone to LIV should be allowed to compete in majors, etc. No sports fan, no golf fan likes what's happened, and it's turned people off. They're not tuning in to watch it as much as they used to. And we're not seeing in every tournament the best players in the world play against each other. So I guess for me, the Olympics gives us an opportunity to actually see that, because LIV or not, like John Rahm will be representing Spain at the Olympics. He's to the LIV Tour, but he's going to be at the Olympics. So we should see the best of the best at the Olympics. And for me, that's really what you want. It's not about who won the FedEx Cup. It's not about who gets to wear a green jacket. It's about the best of the best competing for those gold medals, those gold, silver, and bronze medals. And, you know, it started with George Lyon. He got the first one. I wish we could find it.
Yeah, that's going to be a mystery. But I mean, I think in the intro it's like, wow, it's almost like that, you know, tee shot that looked great and then it just took off and the wind got it and it's in the long grass, I guess, somewhere. Or
the puck from the 72 Canada-Russia series that apparently got shot into a snowbank somewhere. Somewhere there's George Lyon's gold medal.
Yeah, I mean, we've had two different 72 Summit Series books on this podcast that we did in 2022 for the 50th anniversary. I'm mentioning this more for the audience. You know, Scott Morrison was here. He did a book about, you know, Noah, and then John U. Bacon, American, but with, you know, some Canadian ancestry, did his book about it, The Greatest Comeback. So, Michael, I just want to wind down. I'd like to do a little section called Take or Light as a cool down before we sign off. I have to ask because, you know, as my way of compensating when I recorded the intro was I had to work in some sort of Caddyshack reference. That's just how I am. Do you have a favorite golf movie?
Okay. Well, you know what? There aren't too many good golf movies. I mean, I know Caddyshack's always ranked as number one. But I think the best golf movie that could ever be made would be to tell George Lyon's story in film. Because I'm going to come back to a discussion about golf films in a second, but I've always imagined, ask your listeners to think of this as an analogy. Picture Bernhard Langer as a good older golfer playing 36 holes of golf against Jordan Spieth. So there's Bernhard Langer, is basically a 60-year-old now, playing against Jordan Spieth, who came on the tour, I think, when he was 16 or 17. But let's say he's 20. A 60-year-old playing a 20-year-old for 36 holes of golf. And Bernhard Langer wins. And we'll say that the second 18 holes was sudden death. And after Bernhard Langer beats Jordan Spieth, he goes to the clubhouse to get his trophy. And Bernhard Langer takes off his jacket, stands up on his hands, and walks across the dining room on his hands jumps up onto his feet after crossing the dining room and accepts his trophy. That's what George Lyon did. He's a 46-year-old golfer beating a 20-year-old golfer after 36 holes of golf, 34 holes of golf actually, walked on his hands across the dining room to accept the trophy. And it's an unbelievable story. That's the kind of man he was.
Yeah, and there's a lot of period pieces filmed around Southern Ontario. So if anyone writer hears about that, we've got probably all the shooting locations you could ever want. Now, I did want to ask too about how did you come to be? I guess you said you've done a lot of interviews about it and worked on a lot of cases related to this, but you became the lotto lawyer go-to in Toronto.
Yeah. In Canada.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I've had cases in Alberta. Just finished one in Alberta. So I did I don't know how much time you've got to talk with this, but I did a TV show for 3 years on BNN called Strictly Legal. And one night I said to the producers, hey, why don't we do a TV show? The show was focused on, I do a different topic every week, the employment law, family law, states law, real estate law, criminal law. And then one night I said, why don't we do an episode about lotteries, people who fight over lotteries? And the producer said, I don't know if we'll get any calls, because we do live calls on air. So anyways, we said, tonight we're talking about lottery law. Well, the phone lines just lit up. People were phoning. We had dozens of calls. Because there are lots of people who fight over lotteries, and the fights tend to be around group purchases. Somebody didn't put their $5 in, somebody, put 20 in, but they needed to have an extra 5 in for this particular draw. Somebody was supposed to buy tickets, but they didn't. You wouldn't believe it. It's just nonstop. Every case is different about how these groups get into disputes. The one I just had in Alberta, fellow gave his money, put his name on the list, found out that the group had won, and when he went to get his share, he was told that, sorry, that the list that you put your name on was not for the Wednesday draw, that was for the Saturday draw. People, the way they keep their records for group play, it can be a real mess. And even though lottery corporations in Ontario, the Ontario Lottery Indian Corporation, and in Western Canada, it's the Western Lottery Corporation, they all work together through a coordinating office. But they have group play forums. And I'm shocked the number of people who do not use group play forums to help themselves. And I was asked by Maclean's magazine to write up a model contract for group play, which they then posted on their website. I wonder if it's still available. It should be. But people do need to have some pretty clear rules as they go into these group purchases, because I'll tell you that if there is a dispute, the way that it unfolds is as follows. Well, let's say a group has won $40 million. And let's say there are 10 people in that group. And there's one person who thinks that they should be in the group for whatever reason. And they phone me. And my first step is I get in touch with the lottery corporation and block that $40 million from being paid out. Not to hold back 1/11 of the 40 million, to block the whole 40 million from going out until it's sorted out. And the lottery corporation's response to that is, tell us which court file number to pay the money into. They wash their hands of it. They don't want to be involved in it. So they take the money that's in dispute and they put it in court. And then people fight over it. And I mentioned at the outset how long some of these court disputes can go on. It's a very effective way to get people to get focused on how much they really want to fight about these things. But they're interesting disputes, and you really see a different side of people.
Yeah, and I mean, you remind me of Marge Gunderson at the end of Fargo. There's more to life than money, don't you know that? But I mean, we are talking in some of these cases of millions. And of course, and then she's just like, "Hey, it's a beautiful day." And of course, as you were saying, it's a beautiful day to get out in golf. And Michael, I think I'll let you be able to shift your focus to that after one last question. I just want to know, what's one course in Canada that you're itching to play but haven't gotten around to yet?
Boy, that's a good question, and I have an easy answer. Hamilton. Here I live in Burlington, and I've never played Hamilton Golf and Country Club or any club. And they just finished playing the Canadian Open there, and gosh, it's I've walked it. In 2003, the Canadian Open was played there, so I had a chance to walk the course and watch the competition, and I would dearly love to get over and play that course.
Well, that would be.
And I guess Cabot Cliff.
Okay. Yeah.
Second.
Well, I hope you do today, and I would be remiss if I didn't throw in a plug that the former director of the Canadian Open, now the commissioner of the Ontario Hockey League, Brian Crawford, is from our corner of Ontario, and I knew Brian a little when he was a university football player. So once again, Michael Cochrane, thank you so much for this and for all your time today. And again, for the readers, the book is...
Appreciate it.
Yeah, and again, for readers, it's Olympic Lion, The Untold Story of the First Gold Medal in Golf, written by Michael Cochrane. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.